Megan called just as I was deep in work. I didn't have time to speak, and I wanted to interrupt her. Without listening, especially when she hesitated for a few seconds before speaking, just when I was ready to tell her I didn't have time, she started crying. Everything else was instantly forgotten in the face of my daughter's obvious pain. "Megan, what happened, honey? Tell me." I felt helpless, listening to the anguish in her sobs. Did someone die? I thought about it. Or did her boyfriend dump her? What if she's pregnant? Endless possibilities of hurt swirled through his mind like clothes and a dryer. "Oh, Daddy, Megan, we need to talk to you." Us. "Is she really pregnant?" "Okay, I'll go home right now." I started. "No," my daughter insisted. "We need to meet away from Mom." It was a turnaround. My wife was usually the one my children interacted with. "Okay," I repeated. "Tell me where and when." We agreed to meet by the lake in the park after work. "We love you, Daddy," she said sadly, hanging up. I was useless at work for the rest of the day. I kept thinking about Megan. "We love you, Daddy." The voice sounded so sad. Why did her words hurt me so much? And were we, her, and her brother and sister? Is she also a lover? I couldn't concentrate on work at all. Megan was 16, Diana was 15, Ian was 13. Joanna and I met while I was on shore, leave in San Diego in 2005. Joanna worked as a topless waitress while she was in college at SDSU. I was a horny sailor who was lucky enough to hook up with a woman who was a goddess, too good for the seedy bar where she was groped. Long story short, I spent the entire vacation with Joanna, and after going on a short cruise, returned to San Diego with the firm intention of making her mine forever. We eloped to Vegas, got married, and were just getting ready for a wonderful marital vacation when my ship was booked to the Persian Gulf. I moved Joanna back to my small home town where my parents had a rental house that they rented to us. I tried introducing her to some of my friends before rushing back to Dago for duty, but she didn't seem to interact with them. They were too straightforward for Joanna. In San Diego, she was used to a more interesting group. I figured she had gone to college there, so my country friends were probably too introverted for her. I felt awkward leaving her in an unfamiliar place with no friends except my parents. But the very first letter calmed me down. She met a woman named Monica with whom she seemed to instantly bond. Joanna was just such a person. Just look how quickly we got closer. The letter talked about how much she missed me, but that she was busy with Monica, her boyfriend Bucky, and their friends. She seemed happy, but I still felt guilty that I couldn't be there for her. But then during my second month in the Gulf, I received good news. Joanna was pregnant. Obviously, our farewell had its effect. Now Joanna will not be lonely. I was lucky right after Megan was born and was sent back to the States for training on the updated radar system. Joanna and Megan would join me at school from time to time. I loved my daughter from the moment I saw her, and of course I loved my wife many times before returning to your ship. Deja vu. During my second month in the Gulf, I received good news. Joanna was pregnant again. Diana was a stubborn child. She waited until her 42nd week to be born. We were afraid of a possible stillbirth, but Joanna seemed strong and resilient. I'm stuck in the Gulf of Mexico. By the time Diana finally showed up, I was back in the States, spending a week at home before returning to San Diego to go through the discharge process. When I returned home, I was able to accompany my newly pregnant wife to her first LEMAS class. Ian burst into our lives. When he arrived at 38 weeks, Joanna was busy with the children and spent a lot of time with my now retired parents. I asked my mother what happened to Monica and her friends. I hardly saw them for the last few months. My mother told me, because you have children, it's hard not to break away from your single friends. I think Joanna's just settling down. That's all. She doesn't really have many new friends. Everyone she knows now has children. Joanna, the kids, and I lived an idyllic life in my hometown. I was able to use my naval education to obtain an engineering position at a local television station. It was a well-paying position. And over the next 12 years, I was able to advance to department head. We had a wonderful lifestyle with healthy, active children. What could go wrong? Something went wrong, I thought while waiting by the lake. I arrived early and was very nervous. Waiting did not improve my state of mind, as did the big hugs all three kids gave me. They all had tears in their eyes. They all seemed to avoid looking me in the eye. Megan pulled me towards a park bench. I sat between my daughters and my son stood next to us. Diana squeezed one of my hands in hers and rested her head on my shoulder. She cried, "Dad." Megan gathered her courage and began, "We love you. You are our dad always." She couldn't stand it and started crying again. My God, what was that? I myself began to experience rapid breathing. She started again. "Dad, my class was given an assignment to create a family tree, and I thought I could get more by sending our DNA to 23 and helped me." She wiped her eyes. "Cousin Elizabeth told me about her family's results, and I thought it would be a big surprise for you and your mother. So I sent Diana's and Ion's information. I had problems breathing. I could only think of one thing this could lead to, and I didn't want to hear my daughter say it. Dad, we are not your children." Megan looked at me with the saddest expression I had ever seen. I shook my head. "Wait a minute. You didn't have my DNA, so what makes you think you're not mine?" I almost laughed with relief. Whatever the children think, it must be a mistake. "Dad, they show everyone you are connected with. They show everyone in my mother's family on the maternal side, but the paternal side is full of people we don't know. Most of them are Europeans." It gave me chills. I was trying to figure out how the kids could have gotten the correct version of Joanna's DNA, but not mine. Is it the same for all three of you? This confused me. How could this be? Yes, and we are all full brothers and sisters. Diana squeezed my hand. "You are our daddy. You are our daddy." She buried her face in my chest. Ian looked miserable, like he wanted to cry, but he was trying to be a man. He sniffed and wiped it with the back of his hand. We sat in silence for several minutes. I listened to my girls cry quietly, and my son kicked the ground with his shoe. Finally, I spoke. "Give me the 23 APME reports. Guys, could you go to the cinema or something tonight? Maybe for the night. Let me talk to your mother." I hugged the girls and held them close to me. Ian shook my hand, trying to be brave despite the tears. They agreed to spend the night at a friend's house. Megan handed me the reports, and they turned to leave. When I stopped them, all three of them turned as one and looked at me. "I am your father. Despite everything, it doesn't matter what these reports say. There is no one else."
I forced a smile. "You are my children, and I couldn't ask for better ones." I kissed them again and
Hugged them tightly. Left alone, I looked through the reports. There could be no mistake. They were clearly Joanna's children, not mine. I didn't know a single person on my father's side. All my relatives were absent, including my sister and her family. I went home to find out the truth. Joanna was preparing dinner, but turned around when I walked in, opening her arms to give me the usual hug and kiss. She stopped, arms wide open, when she saw my face. "What's wrong?" I have never spoken to her so coldly. "Who is their father?" Joanna. Her face turned pale and her eyes widened in panic. "What? What are you talking about?" Megan did 23 nump me on all three. Joanna. I walked up to her and growled, "Who is their father?" Joanna backed towards the chair and sat down. "Ian should be yours," she muttered, staring at the floor and shaking her head. "Bullshit. Ian matches both girls." "Brother, who did you sleep with?" "Creature, does he still have you?"
I was losing control. I clenched my fists, pressing my arms to my side so as not to hit her.
"It's impossible, Jim. This is impossible." Joanna shook her head. She started to get up, but I grabbed her and threw her back into the chair. She shuddered and looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Are you going to sit down right now and tell me what happened, or am I going to have
To beat it out of you. Her fear increased along with my threat. I was in so much pain, and I was so angry that I probably would have beaten her. She stared at me for a moment, then dropped her.
Head into her hands, defeated. She started so quietly that I almost didn't hear her speak. It was so long ago. I suddenly found myself in this provincial town, all alone. I loved you.
But you weren't there. Your friends were so boring. But then I met Monica, and she took me to local.
Eateries. She had drugs like the ones at the club in San Diego. She sniffled and looked at me. I was 19 years old. I'm used to parties. I loved you, but you left me here. Monica and Bucky were funny. We had fun, got high, and got drunk. You had been gone for 2 weeks before I woke up in bed with Bucky. He had other friends there too. I don't know who the father was, but it was probably one of them. She looked at me with despair. I prayed for you to be the father. I really did. You could be one. We had sex often before you left. She lowered her eyes to the floor, admitting defeat. Slut. I was stunned. You weren't faithful to me even for 2 weeks. And you've had sex with so many guys that you don't know who the baby's father might be. I stood up and hit the table with both fists. Are you creature kidding me? You fucking slut. Joanna sat back in her chair. I didn't intend to sleep with them. We were having fun, and then I woke up. They used me. Oh, yes. You really resisted. Apparently you resisted so well that you resisted at least 2 more times over the next 3 years. I wanted to pound the table until I broke my arms. I wanted to grab a chair and hit the refrigerator with it. I wanted to hurt Joanna. I wanted to hurt myself. No. My wife stood up and went to the sink to get a glass of water. Perhaps to get away from me. No, I resisted, but Monica had the film. She threatened to show your parents if I didn't keep hanging out with her. She said gang bangs are more fun with 2 girls. Gang bangs? How many guys have you been with? I didn't want to know. Why did I ask? Bucky had 1 or 2 parties every week with 5 or 6 guys each time. Sometimes there were more of them and Monica would join us, but usually it was just me. I tried to control it. I used spermicide and Plan B, but when you were home, I must have screwed up. She looked at me again, but I hope they were yours. I convinced myself that it was so. Joanna returned to the table and sat down. She looked at me for a moment, lost in her thoughts. I should have resisted more. I should hate this. She shook her head in astonishment. But you know that I love sex. You were everything I needed. That's why I married you. I don't need anyone else. She looked at me sadly, but you weren't here. And maybe Monica. Blackmailing me was the excuse I needed. So I decided that if I had to have sex, I might as well enjoy it. She saw the expression on my face. I know it hurts you, but I want to be honest. Yes, I was drugged, raped, and blackmailed, but then I came to terms with it. She started sobbing. Again, you weren't here. You weren't here, but I needed you. I went clubbing with Monica, and she encouraged me to go to the parking lot with her friends. We had sex in the back seat of Monica's car or in Bucky's van or in the guy's car if Monica had hers. Then there were gangbangs. They usually took place on Saturdays. Whenever you came home, I refused to go to the meetings that Monica and Bucky arranged. I didn't go to the club with Monica. You were everything I needed. She looked at me with fear and tears in her eyes. I made sure you never even met Monica and Bucky. You didn't even notice. You were always either with the girls or with me in bed. Speaking of girls, where were Megan and Diana while you were having fun? I mocked this fallen woman who was the mother of my children. Your mom liked looking after them. She knew I was lonely. Here, I've never lived in a small town like you. I'm used to the parties and excitement in San Diego. I was used to sailors groping me and lusting after me. She lowered her head and began to sob. Damn it. I'm used to being owned. I was shocked. Now my wife looked at me as if it was my fault. I wanted to hit her back. So are you still having sex with Monica? Or do you have a new pimp? Joanna smiled wryly. Good choice of words. At parties, I thought I was having sex for fun. Then one evening, just before you returned from the bay for good, Monica got sick, and I went to the club alone since I had already given the children to your mother. She shook her head and winced. I wasn't forced to go to the club, but by that time I was already going to clubs and having sex. Anyway, one of the gangbang regulars was there, and I went with him to his car. After he finished, I was getting dressed when he handed me some cash. I asked what it was for, and he said that since neither Monica nor Bucky were there, he thought he should give it to me. Usually, they're the ones who take the money. It was then that I realized that I was not just the libertine I thought I was. I worked in the sex services industry. Tears streamed down my face. Again, I thought I had low self-esteem, but that night I discovered that I was even lower than I thought. She looked into my eyes for a few moments before continuing. That's when I sent Monica and Bucky. I threatened to go to the police, even if it meant being arrested for providing sexual services. You were supposed to be home within a month. I just wanted to spend my life with you. Her face distorted. I only wanted you. Month. This doesn't explain Gina. I can't explain it to Ian. Bucky insisted on having more intercourse, but I used spermicide and forced him to wear a condom. I was sure that Ian was yours. I sat for a few minutes. We looked at each other in silence. I thought about the years we spent together, wondering if it was just us or if there were others in bed with us, so to speak. Then I thought, 2 weeks. 2 weeks alone, and she's already slept with Bucky. Then I realized that I would never trust her. Get your junk, say goodbye to your kids, and get the hell out of my life. I could probably forgive you if you told me when you first woke up with Bucky. But how can I trust someone who admits that they've enjoyed sex work for years? Even when it wasn't necessary, you couldn't wait. But since that last time with Bucky, it's just been you. I've always been faithful. She saw the look in my eyes. We'll never get through this. She sobbed, stood up and left the room to pack her things. I left the house. I later found out that she had collected most of her clothes and left. I don't know where she was staying, but she came home the next day while I was at work. She wanted to try to explain all this to the children. They weren't kind to her. Megan, in particular, was extremely vicious. My neighbor later told me that Megan kicked her mother out of the house, calling her a slut. Megan yelled at her to go get sex somewhere else while neighbors came out to see what the noise was. And Diana and Ian watched from the porch. We never saw Joanna again. She went into the bank and took most of our savings. She left me investment accounts, so I ended up with more than half of our wealth, not including the house. I didn't know where to file her divorce papers, so I just waited the 2 years it took to file a missing person report. My mother loved Joanna like her own daughter. She loved my children even more. I was afraid to tell her about Joanna's sex work and the unknown, though probably Bucky, origins of the children. I sat at the kitchen table, drank coffee, and broke the bad news. Her face literally contorted as she began to sob from the horror of it all. And the children, aren't they yours? Does DNA show this? Yes. Apparently they are related to a bunch of Swedes. Most of their relatives are in Sweden. Mom raised her head sharply. Like this. Did they match your DNA? I explained that we had never tested my DNA, but that it was not necessary. My children had to live up to my sister and her offspring. My mother shook her head in disbelief. I never thought it mattered. That's why we never told you. I really thought it didn't matter. You are my son. I didn't understand what Mom was saying. Was I her son? Wasn't I my father's son? My children should be like my sisters. Mom, what are you talking about? She looked at me almost with pity. Son, you were adopted. We had a Swedish au pair for your sister who got pregnant. We wanted a son, so we adopted you. Your biological mother returned to Sweden after you were born. You were our son, so we never told you about this. Well, I went and took a DNA test, and it matched all 3 of my children. They were mine. As I said, we never saw Joanna again. I don't know what happened to her, and I was never able to tell her that I was the father of her children. But did it matter? If it had not been For the fact that the DNA of the children did not match the DNA of my relatives, I would never have known about my wife's promiscuous past and would probably have remained happily married. But now, can I forget about her past despite the fact that the children were mine? No. It all comes down to the fact that 2 weeks is the limit of her marital fidelity, and the fact that even if she was initially forced, she admitted that she accepted the life that Monica and Bucky provided her. As I tell my kids now, who would have thought that marrying a topless dive bar waitress in San Diego would turn out this way after living in a happy marriage? For many years, I suddenly learned from my 3 children that I was not their biological father. They found out about it by chance when the eldest daughter was given a family tree assignment at school and thought she could get more by sending our DNA to 23andMe. I looked at the reports. There could be no mistake. They were clearly my wife's children, not mine. I didn't know a single person on my father's side. All my relatives were absent, including my sister and her family. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.